So now we're ready to do the sleeve. And what I've done, I originally pressed this with a crease intentionally down the outside of my sleeve so that I would have it stabilized so I could do this correction or this copy. I've pinned the seam also, the underarm seam flat so that it's right on the fold so that it keeps it from twisting around. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to line this outside fold of my sleeve up with the line I've drawn on my paper here. And you could pin it down if you want, or what I like to do is use tape. And I use pretty long strips of tape and I just move it over to make sure it's right on the line and then gently tape it down. Now when I'm done I can just leave the tape on the paper, it doesn't matter. But I find this holds my sleeve a little bit better than the pins without having it do little loops or little ins and outs on the fold. And I just use pretty good sized pieces of tape and come all the way up. Now when I come up here, I do have to pin this shoulder because you can see it wants to round down at the armhole. So right above and right below the seam, I'm going to put a little pin there so that I have that. Now I can smooth it out, and the first thing I'm going to do is mark my points here. Now this sleeve looks like it's got a little bit of a slope. That's most likely due to the way it's sewn because the seam here is probably pulling the knit up, and I can correct that. Little things like that, you have to just be aware of them, and if you look at it and go, that might be sewing, that might be fabric, that might be where it's been worn, I need to correct it. So you have to pay attention to these things. I'm going to draw a little squared off line here at the underarm, and then the rest of the sleeve I'm going to use my pin and I'm going to perforate this back sleeve. Now this is the back sleeve. I don't care what the front sleeve's doing. I can feel it in there, but it's nothing of concern to me right now. I'm only focusing on this back sleeve and the shape of this cap. So I want to go around through here keeping it nice and smooth. Don't stretch it, don't let it pucker. And then I'm going to put one last pin right here. Okay? Now I'm going to gently take this out from under my tape. I'm going to just leave the tape on the paper. That way I don't rip my paper. That one wants to come off, so it can come with me, as is that one. Now I can raise up my sleeve here, and then I can turn it over on this side. Just like this. Now I want to place this point exactly where I left off with that one. That's very critical. So I'm going to pin it first. I'm going to pin it on both sides, the shoulder and the seam line. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come down through here, placing my fold line right on the drawn line I did on my paper. So all the way down through here. Now when you do a sleeve, different in a knit than a woven, you do not have sleeve cap ease with this sleeve because you depend on the stretch of the fabric to do the ease across the cap or girth of your arm, the shoulder ball of your arm. So you don't really need sleeve ease. That's the beauty of it. Now I'm going to flatten it out nice and flat, and then we're going to do the front armhole. Same thing, we're going to take our pin, oh actually, getting ahead of the game here, I want to draw this in first. So I'm going to come to the underarm, draw my T mark, and then draw a dash line right where the seam is. Make sure you hold it so that it gets an accurate copy of your sleeve. So just kind of gently press along the edge so that you get an accurate copy. Again, this sleeve opening is crooked, but I'll deal with that in a minute when I get the whole pattern done. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just perforate along through here like such, making sure I hold it firmly too because I don't want my sleeve cap distorted. Now notice where that fold is. See that fold right there? You want to mark this really good because that's where your shoulder seam notch is going to go on your sleeve. So I'm going to do about 3 or 4 little perforations in there so that when I pull this up, I'm very aware of where that seam line is because that's important to go back to my pattern with. Okay, so we're going to pull this out. Let's see if it'll just come off. It's on tape, so it probably should. And then I'll show you how to fix this sleeve. So now we have our sleeve roughed in on our paper. And let's talk about this hem. Remember how it's bowing down here? So I have a choice. I can make it longer and extend these 2 sides down, or I can make it shorter. So I think I'm going to go for the longer length, and I want to make sure that I'm square to my center front, or my center line, my grain line of my sleeve. And I want to check this sleeve now. I want to make sure that I'm the same width on both sides. This is just a double check. So 3.5 here comes to right there, and 3.5 over here is right here. So this is where I want my sleeve to begin and end down here. So I'm going to make square lines just so I know that my sleeve is going to be nice and clean. From there I'll add an inch hem. So basically everything on one side of the sleeve is the same as the other until we get to the top up here. So let's go to the top and let's dot in our lines, and then I'm going to show you the best way to do the bottom half of the sleeve and the top half. It's a very cool little way. Remember the notch area I made where the seam was? This is where my shoulder seam is actually going to be. So it goes slightly toward the front more than the back. So here's my basic sleeve. Now I want to make sure that my bicep level line is even here. So I don't want one side lower than the other. And as you can see, my back is slightly lower here. So I'm just going to draw the bicep level line in, and I'm going to make the alteration here that this is going to be lower, because you want this sleeve balanced. Now, to carry on that theme of balance, you're going to fold it in half right along the line you originally made. So just fold it right in half so that you're right on this crease. Now sometimes, because you're working with a knit and you're working with fabric, these little things happen where you get off a little bit in the armhole, or the cuff opening gets a little askew, but that's okay. They're easily fixed. Now what happens here is, I want to make sure that these two lines are on top of each other. If you can see through your paper, that's great. If you can't, come back in and take this side and perforate it over to the other side so that these two, you can see, are the same. And you don't have to perforate quite as much as me, because you just want to check it. Because once we've checked it, we're going to use one side as our go-to, and the other side will follow suit. So they're very close. Very, very close. So I'm going to use the other side as my line, and I'm going to draw my 3/8 to it and cut it out. Now that's going to adjust it a wee bit, but you definitely want to make sure that these two seams, if not identical, are very close to it and the same length. So this helps the truing and blending process to do this. So I'm just going to add little dash lines to accommodate my seam allowance here. This can go pretty much straight right in there. And then once I have this, I'll use my very curve to solidify all these lines. Now, as I get to this underarm point, I've noticed that one side here is a little bit longer than the other side. So I'm going to split the difference here. I'm going to have one go a little bit longer, so it's about 1/4 inch. So I'm going to bring this line in 1/8 of an inch right here so that it's the same on both sides. Still keeping this point right here. I want this point to stay the same. So I'm just going to take a little bit off there. Now I'm going to cut this side out this way. Oh, forgot to add my hem. Don't forget to add your hem. Very important. So I'm just going to, if you do that, see, that's how easy that can be fixed. But I just want to square off here with 1 inch and add my hem line. I'm only going to cut it up. I haven't done anything to the sleeve cap yet, so I'm not going to do anything until I've done all of this, and then I'll come back and do the sleeve cap. So I want to come in here, because I have to do the sleeve cap open. I can't do it folded like this. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to take, when I get to the top of this armhole area, underarm area, I'm just going to slice off just that 1/8 of an inch there. And that way it stays balanced on both sides. They're the same. Now, let's open it back up. And we're going to fix the sleeve cap. So we want to lay it nice and flat, and we're going to come in here. Don't need that anymore. And I don't need this anymore, so we'll just get that out of the way. So we're just going to work with the sleeve cap now. So I'm going to come along through here, and I'm going to add 3/8 of an inch all the way around my sleeve cap. And once I have this added, I'm going to walk. The bottom now has been walked by folding it and cutting them out. They are identical. Don't have to worry. It's balanced, it's trued, it's blended. So that folding it in half and cutting it mirror image is the balance, truing and balancing of the bottom. The top, however, we still need to walk it to the armhole of our shirt, of our torso, and make sure that it fits just exactly like we want it to. So I'm doing these little dash lines along the seam edge or seam allowance, so that when I get ready to walk it into the sleeve, it will be compatible to that. So, and right here, and then I'm going to just take my Very Curve and clean this up, extend this out here, and then I'm going to just clean this all up along through here, along the edge of my seam allowance. And then we're going to get the body and we're going to walk it. And then after that, I'm going to show you how to make the rib collar. And then you'll know how to copy a t-shirt. And from this t-shirt, many things can be made, just like we did with the basic torso block. If you've seen any of the other videos on my YouTube channel, you'll notice that we have a woven torso block that we've used and made several different designs out of it. This too can become a block, basic block for many different designs. So I'm going to just bring this notch straight up. Now I'll place the other notches in when I'm finished walking it out. So we're just going to put this one in for now. But I'll put the underarm notches in when I walk it to the body. So let me finish cutting this out and get the body over here, and we'll go from there. So now I'm ready to walk my armhole to my sleeve, and I haven't cut this off. I said in an earlier clip that I was going to cut this off, but I want to leave it until I've made sure everything's working, and then I'll put these notches in. So I'm going to align it here so that I'm on my seam line, and I'm going to hold my seam line, and I'm just going to pivot my underarm area. See how nice it fits? That's a real good sign. If these two are the underarm area of your torso or your body fits with your armhole this well, that means it's a good fitting sleeve, and probably has a lot to do with why I like this pattern so. It fits really nice, and now it's going to be mine. I've already ordered fabric. I'm going to make 5 of these. I got my fabric for $3.75 a yard, free shipping. So I paid close to $24 for the original t-shirt. So you can see the savings once you have this all done. Now right here, I want to mark where this notch, where this seam line is actually coming to. Right there. I'm just going to put a little mark and put an F next to it, because that's where the front's lining up. Because this may change the position of this. I don't know yet. So I'm going to do the same in the back. I'm going to use my pin. I'm going to hold it on the seam line. Make sure you hold it on the seam line, not the seam edge, because that will distort it. And you just keep pivoting it until it aligns. And then when it's no longer aligning, move your pin, realign, and pivot some more until you get all the way up through here. And once you get to the top, sometimes you have to kind of rotate things so that you can keep working. And I'm going to mark where my top is, where my back top is. So right here, I fold this back on my seam line. My back is right here. So my sleeve cap is actually a good ½ inch smaller than my actual sleeve. Now there's 2 ways we can fix this little issue. We can either let it out at the top. It's exactly a ½ inch smaller than my sleeve. So that means most likely that this sleeve has been stretched into the armhole. Now, because I've copied this pattern and I like the way it fits, I could leave it and just stretch this sleeve into the armhole as well. That's the beauty of knits. They have a lot more flexibility. That being said, I want to show you how to accommodate for this ½ inch, just in case you do want it to be perfect. The first thing I'm going to do is come back in here, and I'm going to grab the notches off the bottom of my underarm. So I want to make sure these two notches are in place. So this notch right here will be right here. I'm just going to trace it off so that they are the same. That's the back. This is the back armhole. And then I'm going to do the front. And then I'm going to show you how to open this cap up and adjust it for whatever might be needed. And this works too in a woven. So let me go ahead and cut this out, and then I'll show you the adjustment. Okay, so now what I've done is I've cut the pattern open on the grain line to the bicep level line, and I've left it, I cut just to the seam, and I clipped a little notch in the outside edge of the seam allowance so this would pivot, because it needs to pivot a little bit so that it's kind of flexible. I call that a hinge. Then on each side of your line that you've drawn, extended your grain line up, you want to come over a quarter on each side because we're going to let it out a 1/2 inch. And a quarter is equal to a 1/2 inch. And then you're going to take these two sections and you're going to raise them off the bicep level line at the same time. You don't want one higher than the other, but they need to be even. And when you get them even, and you've got your 1/2 inch gap in there, you simply pin it down. Now my sleeve, for those of you that suffer from OCD, will perfectly fit my armholes. And I feel better about that. Even though I know it fit me very well, it just in the back of my mind, I like it better if I know the two fit. So I'm going to cut this out. But before I do, I just want to check and make sure that I put my notch, my shoulder seam notch in the right place. So I'm going to align this notch. I don't even have to go all the way to the bottom because I've already got this notch in place. I'm going to hold my seam and I'm going to pivot it around until I find the new shoulder seam. And once I find that, I'm going to mark it. I'm going to do the same in the back. And between that space, if there is any, or right on that line, if they touch, which I'm hoping they touch, that's going to be where I'm going to put my shoulder seam notch. So I'm just going to carry on here, almost there. So right here is where my new line is. Now, when I mark this line, I've got so many lines up here, I'm going to circle it so I know that it's my final line. Now let's see if the back meets up to it. It should be very close, if not at least closer than it was. So we're going to put our notch together because we know that that's where we left off and it matches. That way I don't have to walk the whole armhole and sleeve having that in there. So I'm just going to flip it around through here, rotate my pattern so I can accommodate the movement. And you have to keep moving it. So you want a good work area. You want a lot of space. And right here is my back. So it's almost on top of it. It's like right there. So I'm going to move this over. There, it came to the front, so we're about 1/8 of an inch gap there. So that's where I'm going to make my shoulder seam notch. I can live with 1/8 of an inch. I think the stretch factor in my fabric will definitely accommodate that. So this is going to be my new shoulder seam notch right there. I'm going to blend this off here, and that becomes my sleeve. I'm going to cut it out, and it's all done. So the final part of copycatting this t-shirt is we're going to do the neckband rib. Now if you're using a fabric such as a 1x1 or a any fabric that has the same stretch factor that a rib does, which means 100%, it should be able to stretch twice its width or length when you're considering a rib or any type of knit that's going to do a neckline or bands on a cuff or something like that. You also want to make sure it has recovery. If it stretches from 5 to 10 inches, it needs to be able to bounce back and rebound back to 5 inches. If it stays out there, you're going to have issues. So now we're going to measure along this outside edge. Okay, I'm going to measure from my shoulder seam right here to the front neck and from my shoulder seam to the back neck. So the front neck over from the pin is 4 7/8. So just make note of that on my paper. And then I'm going to measure from the same pin location to the back neck. So I want to get right on the pin, and the back neck is 3 5/8. So I make note of that. And then I'm going to make my neckband. So let's get this out of the way, and I want to show you what I've done. So what I've done here is I've already pre-drawn my neckband. Now the neckband on the shirt is only 5/8 inch wide. I want mine a little wider, so I'm going to make it 7/8, which is going to close the neckline in 1/4 of an inch. But that's okay. I want it a little thicker. I don't want the 5/8. So that's something you can decide. So this is your seam allowance. This is the 7/8 that I want my neckband to be. This is the folded down side of that 7/8 so that it folds in half, 7/8 on one, fold over, 7/8 on the other side, and then again 3/8 seam allowance. So I have everything marked here. This will represent a shoulder seam right here. Let's put it on the pattern. So this will be a shoulder seam. And I'm going to measure out my measurement. So I'm going to do the front neck first. So my front neck was 4 7/8 from my seam line. So I'm going to come over 4 7/8 inch, which is right here. And this is going to be a notch. So I'm going to mark it on both sides, 4 7/8. And I'm going to put a carrot notch on both sides of this line. Barely left myself enough room, but I think I've got it. Then the other half of the neck is 4 7/8 as well. So I'm going to put another carrot notch here. This will represent the other shoulder seam. So see, 4 7/8, 4 7/8. This will be the other shoulder seam right here. And then I'm going to do the back. So from here, it'll be 3 5/8 will be the back. And right here will be the back notch. And over here, 3 5/8. I want to do it on both sides so I don't get my neckline twisted. And then I'm going to do the last half of my back neck, which is 3 5/8. Right here and right here. And this will be the other side of my shoulder seam, which is over here. So I'm going to add 3/8 to that line. So these two are shoulder seams. This is a shoulder seam. This is the front and this is the back. So just mark it as such. And then when I cut this out, it will stretch in to my neckline and fit comfortably without buckling or puckering my neckline. So let me add a few of the notches, and then we'll cut it out and show you what it looks like. So this will get a single notch. This side gets a single notch. My shoulder seam will get a single notch right here. And my back notch will be double because I've made a double notch in the back neckline when I made my torso part of this pattern. So I'm going to do 2 notches adjacent to each other, and then I'm going to put a bar over them so that I know this is the back. This is very important because you don't want to cut this out and sew it on backwards and stretch the heck out of the front neck, and then the back neck's too big. So you definitely want to make a difference between your front and back neck notches. Now all this notching and all this looks like a lot of work, but when you start sewing it, it's going to be so helpful because you pin all the notches and then you stretch the fabric in between those places, and you'll have a nice clean fit. So let me cut it out. I'll show you the whole pattern and we're done. So I went ahead and I sewed up the t-shirt, and I didn't have quite enough fabric to make long sleeves, but I made elbow length sleeves. All the sewing has been done on a overlock machine, serger machine, and the hemming I plan to do on a cover stitch. That being said, if you do not have either of those machines, you can make this with a stretch stitch on your regular machine. Do all the seams and the hems with a stretch stitch. It's quite easy to put together, and I love it. I'm so excited about it. I'm going to use it to make other garments off of, and that's it. That is copycat t-shirt pattern.